Hey everybody, it's Tuesday.
And welcome to this week's edition of Hook, Line, and Striker.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily. And we are excited to be here with you tonight. One crazy note, next week, actually, Josh and I are going to be on vacation. So not even sure
how... We do take a break.
Yeah, not sure, the Chippewa flowage, if you know anything about that, let us know fishing reports, because I am... This time next week, maybe I'll even be fishing. So with that, this show is actually going to be on hold for 1 week. So to those of you who join in all the time, thank you so much for being here with us. But, again, what is that date going to be?
We'll be back on the 29th.
Okay. So the 22nd, we're off. We're fishing. Chippewa flowage, we'll let you know. We'll give you a report at some point, that's for sure. But again, if you have one, if you're there now, let us know what it's looking like. I want to know water temp. If anybody knows Chippewa flowage water temp, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Hey, Roland.
As far as though, we are in, Wisconsin. I always say central Wisconsin. I think it's a little bit northeast Wisconsin, somewhere in there. Our water temps are above 80 degrees in places. That is really, really crazy. With this heat that we've had, it has really turned things up. So
yeah, well,
summer patterns, here we come.
and the weather is nice right now. I would not want to be out there fishing right now. Well, they're talking 40 degrees tonight, 45 degrees. So fish are going to take a break for a little bit for a couple of days here. It's supposed to warm up storms some more. Then we get another cold front. So nice little break for the fish. And then we'll be on top of them on the Chippewa, hopefully.
Well, and either way, we'll find something. So that's awesome. To those of you who are checking in, thank you. Water temp in Bogie is about 70. So I'm thinking that's Iowa. So if that's the wrong guess, let me know. But 70 degrees, that's a pretty good water temp getting up there. 80 gets kind of hot. So kind of crazy. Keep letting us know those fishing reports, though. So thank you. With that, let's bring in our guest tonight.
Yeah. Hey, Pete. How's it going?
Hey, guys. Good to be with you.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I guess I was going to tell you our first question, but now I'm jumping ahead a little bit. What is your water temp? You're up in Canada.
You know what? We've got a real mix. And surprisingly, some of the lakes a little bit north of where I'm at are even warmer than where I am in South Central Ontario here. On the Bay of Quinte, average water temp right now is about 74, kind of right where it should be, but very deceiving. We've had just a wicked spring fishing condition wise, and maybe you guys have too. We had a real warm spell. We had early ice out, which always gets fishermen pretty excited, right? But as soon as the ice went out,
fisherman you are, because as an ice fisherman, I was not excited.
I hear you. I hear that. In fact, our last ice, it was a heartbreaker. It got so sketchy so quick. I had envisions. We talked very briefly earlier. We have a new season catch and release for bass here in FMZ 20 in Ontario. It's the first time we've ever had a catch and release early pre-spawn bass season. Opens from January 1st to May 10th, and I kind of left. I didn't even target them during the winter like yourselves. I'm pretty wrapped up in the crappie scene, bluegills. That's my passion on the ice. But I kind of left the end of the season quite wide open. I was going to go stroll around and try and poke some big largies through the ice. I thought that'd just be a ball, but our ice just got so terrible. It was too dangerous. I never went one time. So next year, something to look forward to already. And having said that, of course, bass season reopens here this weekend, so we're all jacked about that. So our my little window, basically, once the ice fishing's done, I don't do very much, if any, walleye fishing at all, believe it or not. And we've got tremendous walleye fisheries here, and I used to do a ton of it, but man, once I got bit by the panfish bug, it just ruined my life, really.
Yeah.
I haven't targeted walleyes in the springtime probably for over a decade. I mean that truthfully. Yeah.
Man, when you have a fishery that's good enough to, keep you distracted in other ways the whole time, that's a whole lot of fun, no matter what species it is. People have favorites, but what's great is being out there to catch fish. So that's awesome.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like yourselves, that's that's the deal for me. That's why I love pan fishing so much. I'm a numbers guy. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure you guys are exactly the same. It's not just going out and catching a little bunch of little sunfish. It's the big sunfish. It's that trophy panfish mindset that keeps me going. And we are so spoiled. I can't tell you how lucky we are to have some of the fisheries that we've got. You know, we tell, you know, you throw a picture up on socials or something like that, and is that the way you're holding that, or is that really like an 18-inch crappie? You know, it's very spoiled. You know. I don't take it for granted either, let me tell you, but it's the numbers. It's just that I just love fooling fish. It's fooled another one. I don't really care for reeling them in or the fight or anything like that. Just that personal side. Ooh, duped another one. Silly thing. It's all about the bite for me.
That's so awesome. You know, I think that's something that every angler can identify with, because there is just that moment when you detect that bite that there's just filled with so much excitement. So, you know, to those people at home, if you are watching, you know, if you have questions or different things along the way, drop that in the comments. We will definitely continue to talk about that. Otherwise, Pete, I'm going to kind of jump back real quick, because normally our first question is tell us about yourself. So for somebody who's never met you, can you do that for us?
Yeah, I mean, from a fishing perspective, I don't remember ever not fishing. And what's ironic about the whole deal is there's really nobody in my family, first or distance, close or far, who's really into it. It's just something, so I literally did get bit by the bug. It's something internal with me. So when I say I love fishing, I guess I really, really do. And bless my parents for allowing me to kind of pursue that when I was young. But it dominates not just my life, but our entire household, and has done so, man, since I was a teenager. My wife and I, Margaret, we've been married now 34 years, and she's as passionate about it as I am. Not herself doing the fishing, but she just gets a thrill out of watching me enjoying myself and that sport as much as I do. And giving me the freedom to do so is fantastic. And in my college years, I kind of got into tournament fishing, and have done that now for 30 years now. And a few years back, we went and did the Opens. Funny thing about Margaret, she's a social butterfly. I promise you, to this day, she knows more of the full-time pro guys and their wives and everybody. She still keeps in contact with them all on social media, so she really does love the sport too. Yeah. I've been with a lot of great companies for a long time. My relationship, how we kind of know each other, is through Striker. That's a pretty new relationship for me. I think we're moving into my third year with them now. And it's just, I mean, without them, there's no way that I'd be able to fish as much as I do. And, you know, I kind of look and smell like a pro to a lot of people. You know, you throw the tournament jersey on and wow, look at that pro fisherman guy. I promise you, I've got a very, very full-time job. I work probably 220 to 260 hours a month sitting in front of this silly screen here that we're on now. But I'm really, really lucky. Basically, when I'm not in this chair working, I'm somewhere on the water. Yeah.
Well, and, you know, I kind of love hearing that, because so often people just assume that, you know, pros or the people in social media, like, how much do they get paid? You know, oh my goodness, that's their job. You know, I would love to work as, you know, fishing is my job. And right. I just think that so many of us do have full-time real life situations in addition to all the other things that are out there. So, you know, I always love hearing that echoed at other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It's even doing like the trade shows and things like this and stuff like that. Just your obligations with your sponsors. It's not for everybody. You know, the working guy who just wants to fish tournaments or something, if he doesn't have the time, maybe he runs his own business, he can't really afford to go running to do these trade shows or keeping up on socials or whatever it may be. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of work. And I like to think that I earn my keep anyways. I've got a lot of, you know, long time relationships, and I like to think of myself as a loyal pro staffer. That's for sure. It's super. I couldn't be more impressed with Striker and the way it's been received here. I think it was a little bit slow going There's always that magic border that can make things difficult, but man, there's no denying the want and the need for it up here. Yeah.
Well, you know, and I imagine in Canada there can be conditions that are, you know, super extreme, but you know, I mean, it's amazing how creative people can be, you know, without striker gear. You know, people will still bundle up in different ways and get out there, and you know, that's kind of crazy, but I definitely have to say, besides being more comfortable than them, I usually know I'm safer than them.
Right, yeah. Well, you know what? I never take my own word or my own experience for it, and it's the feedback. Everybody who I've personally sold ice suit to has never had one bad thing to say about it, and I think that says a lot for a brand, and just their commitment to quality. I mean, it's undeniable. Yeah.
So, you know, we're kind of talking ice suits, and that makes me think, you know, when you were kind of chatting in the beginning, one of the things that you said that really kind of perked up my ears, you were talking about your late ice bluegills. So I know that at this point we've had some really hot temperatures. So let's take a quick break back into ice season, if you will.
Yeah.
Tell us, what are your tips for getting big bluegills on the ice?
A lot of it for me, it's pretty funny. I think there's two different caveats. It's what you use or how you use it. I'm a definitely 100% advocate behind how you use it. I mean, what's the best way to explain it? I could give the best line, best rod, best lure, color, the hottest thing on the planet to the wrong person who is maybe just working it like a madman and the fish want it super, super slow. That guy's not going to catch anything. So it's presentation. It's all presentation for me. You can catch fish doing the right thing in the wrong spot, as a matter of fact. But if you're doing the wrong thing, even in the right spot, quite often, you know, when your buddy's sitting beside you 20 feet away, just hammering them, fish after fish or fish, and you're just, what is going on? You can see them on your graph. There's a reason for that, right? And I think that's, to be honest with you, that's why I like crappie fishing so much. In my mind, they're kind of like the brown trout of the panfish world, and they are the most finicky creature on the planet. Even in the winter, a cold front comes through, you can watch them, how they behave, where they're sitting in the water column. And there's not too many fish. I've heard that they're related to an African cichlid. And some biology type people use the African cichlids as a bit of a barometer, and I promise you can do that with crappies. And we saw it. We were talking briefly about our spring here, and the weather was just so up and down. We got, I want to say in May, early May, I think our water temperatures got up to 57, which is rare. Very, very quickly. I think it was the 1st of May was the first time I saw that extreme temperature. We went back a week later, it was 42. And just watching the fish shift from one zone right into another and just ball up and lock and not hardly want to move. It just fascinates me to no end, regardless of the fishing, whether I catch them or not. And I mean, man, we're pretty spoiled again with things like live scope and underwater cameras where you can watch them. I could just spend hours doing that. Yeah. But presentation is it for me. I don't know what you guys think. Do you guys have a magic bait that just always gets it done for you, or are you pretty versatile?
You know, that's actually an interesting question. I would say not a magic bait, but you know, magic profile. I think, you know, depending on where you're at, it might be a little bit buggier, it might be minnow. You kind of have to judge that depending on the body of water.
Right.
In winter, I tend to go small. You know, I use a lot of plastics, and I will admit there's a time or two I get outfished by people who are using waxies, especially if we are talking bluegills. But I think I have a better opportunity at crappies with the plastics.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting that you say that. I use exclusively soft plastics and artificials. I don't touch the live bait, maybe because I'm lazy or maybe I find them gross. I don't know. It's one of the two. But what I can tell you, as far as soft plastics, I'm right with you. Early ice, absolutely. I'm down to a little tiny, minuscule chunk of plastic, and it makes all the difference in the world. But as the season progresses, we get into much bigger baits. But maybe the biggest tip that I can give any of your listeners when it comes to ice fishing, for me, there is a drastic difference almost every day between using a vertical jig head, almost like a teardrop shape, versus a horizontal. Are you guys big on the vertical?
Not really. No.
I would
We
say 85 to 95% of my biggest crappies and most of my crappies every winter for the last decade have come on a vertical style jig head. And not with the bait coming out to be horizontal either. We take just a normal little crappie fry, 1 3/4 long. You know, it's built like a shad with a long pointy tail.
Yep.
When it's rigged horizontally, that thing will just sit there and quiver when you pound it. But when you turn it 90 degrees, so the tail is sticking down, it just naturally, the flotation in the plastic wants to curl up. And if you think of a freshwater shrimp, one of the biggest bugs in our waters anyway, little bugs, they're quite big, actually, the freshwater shrimp. And it's a really good meal. They don't swim fast. Crappie eat them on sight, usually. Take a break off the tiny little bloodworms, you know.
Yeah.
But when it's dangling like that, it's lights out. And we've done it way too often. It's kind of embarrassing. I'm not here to brag about how awesome we are, but we're just pounding them, and other people on their buckets are not very impressed with us at all, because they're not getting any. And that's the biggest deal. And they ask us what we're using, and no secrets. I'll just show it to them in my hand, but I really don't think that they pick up on the fact that it's hanging vertically versus horizontal. 85 to 95% of the time, that's what we're doing.
That's really interesting, because I know down here by us, there's a lot of times where you can hit the water and it's crowded. There's a lot of lures down there. Fish have seen a lot of those presentations. The funny thing, though, is a lot of people are putting similar presentations down there. If it's like some kind of a small hard bait, or if it's a jig and a minnow, or, a jig and a plastic, they've seen that in all the colors and even glow by the end of the season, And so when you can put something like vertical down there, I just think, and maybe it's my personal opinion, but I think less anglers use that vertical presentation. And again, it's my opinion, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how to use that. And I would say I'm almost one of those people that's guilty, because I have a bunch of that vertical presentation, and I'll tie it on, and I'll put a plastic, and I'll be like, that looks weird. And I'll put a new plastic, and I'll be like, that looks weird.
You're 100%. You're so bang on the money with that. And I'm sure you've got some bass fishermen here. I mean, the number one bass catching lure out there's got to be a stick bait, right? 5-6 inch Senko style bait. And it probably took me 2 years before I put that thing on. And of course, I rigged at Texas, because that's how you fish a worm. That's wacky rig. That's ridiculous. But I did. But I tied a wacky rig on there, and I put it, and I dangled it, and I couldn't throw it in the water. I swear to you, I couldn't do it. It took me 4 years before I do it. Just because it looks so weird. I just didn't. That's ridiculous. I can't bring myself to do it. And that's all you read about in every article, right? Is you want to be perfectly horizontal, match the minnow. You're using a minnow profile. It should look like a minnow. But man, I'll tell you, when you dangle that thing upside down, you're not trying to replicate a minnow at all. They think that in my opinion, I believe that they think it's a freshwater shrimp.
So what's your go-to color for that then?
Man, that's a really good question. I usually will start with anything white-ish, but very quickly. I think that's one of the fastest colors that fish get conditioned to. And, you might smash 20 or 30 of them on it, and then you start to see a fish come up. And after I get the first deny, the first thing I'll do is just change color. But the profile, so if I'm on fish, or I'm going to a spot where I know that there's fish and I see them responding really well, right off the get-go, I figured I've kind of got the right size dialed in. But as soon as they stop hitting that, I'm instant to change it. Anything is my next color. And I might do extremes. So if I'm going really white or light, I might do a shock color or go something really dark. But I think just the fact of having a change up is the key. I don't think they're overly particular. I really don't know how well they actually see colors. I can tell you that there can be a big difference between having a split or a two-tone laminate type bait versus a solid. And I think what it is, when the fish are really, really going, it's the first thing that they can see. You can get away with a bigger bait. And if you don't split it in half with like a laminate, it gives a lot bigger profile, easier for them to see. We do a lot of night fishing at crappies. I don't know if That's a thing where you guys are at. Quite often, in fact, like you were talking about how crowded it can be. I'll go to these very public places. I might not show up till 10 o'clock at night, and then I'm out of there by 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. I'll be walking off, and people are going out. And I do that just to get away from the crowds a little bit. But man, at night too, having that solid color is a big deal too. I've heard that pink, and I watched kind of a cool video, and a guy had a whole bunch of little cylinders all mounted on the same rack, and he just lowered it down, and it had a little gauge on the side of the video going 5 foot, 10 foot, 15 foot, 20 foot. And one of the last colors that disappeared was pink. It showed up the longest. So that's always been a hot color of mine, just straight pink. If I want a big profile, something that they can see, that's what I do too. You're saying though, I mean, the hottest tip, I think, in my mind anyways, it's the most common, a lot of common mistakes that people make when they're first getting out. 6 pound test is a pretty light line for a lot of folks if they're walleye or bass fishermen or something like that. And 6 pound test, I'll tell you, is that's some thick rope when it comes to the panfish world. And we see it a lot on the ice, and people who are kind of keen and they really want to do well will advise them, start at 4, 3 is about right. Mm-hmm. I don't use 2 pound too often if I'm on waters with really big crappies. I don't know, you guys are probably the same, but man, I've lost some giant crappies using too light a line, that 2 pound cast. Maybe I shouldn't be so lazy and get off my bucket, go down and grab them once in a while, right? How many times
I always seem to lose the bluegills on too light a line. That's I can always get the crappie in somehow, but those bluegills are feisty.
Right.
And we're a little bit odd in the ice fishing, as that we use like a plasma based line from Sunline, the X Plasma.
Okay.
In 8 pound test, and that has it has a less than 1 pound diameter.
Is it a braid?
It's a hybrid. It's a hybrid braid, so it doesn't absorb water because it's a plastic.
Right.
And we use a number 28 swivel from Hatena. Okay. It's
tiny.
So it's made for fly fishing, so you can cast it on a fly. And so I pretty much use that swivel all year round, and I'll be able to. That way we switch out our leaders. You can run a 6 foot leader or even a 4 foot leader. You're ice fishing, so it doesn't have to be super big. And that's such a small swivel. A lot of times during the day, that swivel can actually attract fish because it gives a little bit of a sparkle. Absolutely. But then at nighttime, it doesn't really seem to bother them. We don't get a whole bunch of line twists, and we don't get a whole bunch of the fraying from the ice because we're using braid.
Okay.
It doesn't. I wouldn't say it freezes up any worse than anything else, but that's kind of something a little bit different that we do. Is we have that same swivel thing that you would use open water.
Nice. Very good. Yeah, and I mean that's if you do much ice fishing at all, they call it the death spiral. When your bait's down there spinning around and you're watching fish on the graph come to it. I mean, it's not even just the spinning. And what we're talking about for the listeners is just if your bait's down there, even doing a slow rotation on a dead stick. I don't know what it is. When the fish are going, it doesn't matter. It's almost like frog fishing for bass. I mean, when the frog bites on, you can throw a pop can across the surface and they're going to take a chomp at it, right? It doesn't really matter. But man, on those days, middays especially, things have slowed down a little bit. They get real choosy. It's usually that spiral. Your line's a little bit old. Might be a little heavy, little kink, little coiled. If you've got your lure spinning, that can be the end of your day. I'll just peel off line and put fresh stuff on. Take it with you and put it on. But the new Advance, I'm sure you guys are into it too. I really like these inline reels. How much it cuts down on the line twist is incredible.
Yeah, really so that's a funny thing that Emily isn't such a huge fan of the inline. She just doesn't. She likes the drag.
Oh, sure.
Of the spinning reels. I've switched back and forth. I'm kind of reminiscent of a bass fisherman when it comes to my panfish stuff. I'll have a half dozen rods, and when I just hook it back up and pick up a different one that's already tied with something that I want to try.
Yeah, for sure.
So now I have to have 7 rods out there because now I have to have a vertical jig attached to one of those. So thanks for that. Now I have to get
I'm
another.
telling you, man, I don't know. There's something to it. There's just, we've seen it too many times. Even, there's a lot of different little things. And
yeah,
a lot of people laugh at this too. I'm a huge proponent of scent. And I'll tell you how we proved it. I've used this stuff called BioEdge scent, and their claim to fame. And what they do is they actually use the live farmed critter. They don't go out in the wild and collect these things. But when they have a potion called bloodworm potion, it's made out of bloodworms. And it's the real deal. But regardless of the flavor, bloodworm is the one that I use for pan fishing through the ice all the time. That's my favorite. It smells like cheese if you ask me, but the fish certainly like cheese apparently. But we used to play tricks on people. I do a very minuscule select bit of guiding, and we used to play tricks on the new guy, right? And everybody else would have a little dab of scent on their line, and we're just pounding away on bluegill after bluegill. And the one poor guy, he's got his graph, and he's watching fish come up to his presentation, and they're just, they're going back down. And they'll come up. Maybe they'll nose it, but they won't take it. And they'll go back down, and we're literally, everybody is busy. And he's like, what is going on? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's your rod or something. And I'll give him my rod with a little bit of scent on it. He'll put it down. Okay, that's enough. And I'll take it back. He'll put his down the same hole after the fish have got, a few have come up to the hole, so there's more fish even looking at it now. Put the thing down with no scent. He'll come up, go down, come up, go down. A lot of fun. But even scent, I mean, maybe you got a little bit of crap on your jig or something like that, just from transportation or whatever the case may be. I've seen it make a big difference a lot of times.
Yeah.
Open water fishing too. I know some very good fishermen never use scent. They swear that it's just a bunch of marketing. Save your $4 and go buy another jig head or something. But I'm a huge proponent of that.
Well, I always actually like hearing people talk about this because as a fisherman, I would be like, that doesn't make that much difference. But it's funny because in my life, I actually had a saltwater fish tank for the longest time. And one of the things that we did is, use garlic drops in the tank. Now, there's a whole bunch of different reasons. The fish like it, they eat it. It's good for them for parasites and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But one of the things is that they do love it. And, even, if you have a fish tank, fish can be shy, even your shy fish will come out for that garlic scent and they will swim through it. So I don't know if that's because it's an aquarium setup or, how widely that applies, but I've definitely firsthand seen what that does. And so with that, what I'll do is, in the winter for tip-ups, I'll actually use hot dogs. So a lot of people will laugh at me and that's okay. But my secret for that is, put them in, a Ziploc baggie, marinate it with garlic. You can use fresh. You can use garlic powder. Put a little bit of oil in there, to carry that scent. But look at your face. That's like our secret. It's like a secret because it really does work. So, I mean, I'm also really on board with you when you talk about scent for your bait. That's great.
And it's not every day. Like all these little differences that we talk about, little tips and tricks, it's not every day. But man, when it is the day that's the deal and you don't have it and you're on the wrong end of that stick, it's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's a horrible place to be. And it's funny, we talking about fishing lines. This one might throw you for a loop. Maybe you've experienced it. I don't know where you are on the fluorocarbon versus braid deal. And so I say the word fluorocarbon, people think, oh, that's that invisible monofilament plasticky line, right? And I said, well, yeah, but it's also very, very quiet. It doesn't emit, that zipper sound when the braided line is going through, like I'm a bass fisherman. So when we pitch out or when we set the hook and we're bringing a fish in on braid, it's just like it's loud. It's really loud. And usually midsummer, a lot of our lakes, the bass fishing, I mean, every bass around has been caught 3 or 4 times. They're pretty wary. The water's hot. They're not moving. They're not reacting real well. You really got to be kind of on your toes to catch them, be on your game, super, super stealthy. And again, it's not every day, but man, I'll tell you, there are days when I can be at the back of the boat or the front of the boat running the trolling, it doesn't really matter. But if I'm pitching and flipping with fluorocarbon and my partner is fishing with braid, I will outfish him 9 or 10 or more fish to 1 or none. It can make that big of a difference. And it's not the visibility. I promise you, we fish in some pretty stingy or like really mucked up water, real dark, dirty, icky water. I mean, you think Canada sometimes we got real weedy lakes, gin clear, super clear water. Not when it's 88, 90, 92 degrees in the middle of August. They all turn a little scungy, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's not a visibility thing. I'm positive. I'm convinced it's the sound. And I've seen it, you know, the first few times it kind of, that's pretty crazy. One of the best examples I have was here on the Bay of Quinte. Oh gosh, a long time ago, maybe 12, 15 years ago. It doesn't really matter. But one of my good longtime fishing partners, Rob LaFleur, was fishing with me. I caught 21 fish that day, and it was a tough day on everybody, the whole field. Rob never even set the hook. Like he never, not a rock bass. He never got the swing one time. I felt horrible for him. And that was the clincher for me. I'd seen it a few other times, usually shallow though, like in pads and stuff like that. But this was not that. This was actually deep fishing. And ever since that, I've kind of paid very close attention to it. Having said that now, I've seen people using a braided main line through the ice, especially at night, when everything else is still. We're the only people around. And the guy using straight up fluorocarbon, he's catching them all. And, you know, it's not before too long where all of a sudden that 6 or 7 foot lead becomes 30 of fluorocarbon. and they're right there with you. They catch right up. So maybe there's something to it. I don't know. Maybe I need to write an article or look into it somehow. Yeah. I really believe there's something to it. And just overall noise. I don't know how cautious you guys are on the ice, but I've seen fish react to some pretty weird stuff. I mean, we've all got electronic. I'm sure you guys are electronic. If you forget your sonar at home, I'm sure you're turning around to go get it before you hit the ice. No, I don't know if I could ice fish without it, to be honest with you. It would be pretty weird. But the things that you can see and just the behavior, you know, staring down that flasher. I don't know what you guys use. I'm a big proponent of the flasher. Mm-hmm. And I just really get off on watching how fish react, especially on the good days. You know, you can start messing with them a little bit. You know, you've got everything figured out and you know you're in, 24 feet of water. You drop it down to 14, bring it up to 11, and there's that 3 foot dip. That's the strike zone. As soon as you get 3 feet away from them, somebody's coming to get it. Well, I like stopping it at about 4 feet. It's really teasing to see what I can do to get a different reaction from them. So I just love playing with them. That's where I get off on ice fishing for sure.
Well, and talking about sound with braid, that also applies to the electronics, and that's especially true this time of year when you're shallow water fishing or ice fishing. If I don't have my electronics when I initially get out on the ice, I do have. I will turn home. I'm not even embarrassed to say it. But that being said, after you do figure out kind of where everything's sitting, how everything's moving, I'll turn it off. Turn it off, and I'll either tie on like a slip bob or knot or something just to indicate where my spot is. Yeah. Because they do get sensitive, especially with catch and release fishermen, especially during ice season. They get sensitive to the fish going up and down the hole that has the sound coming out of it. Right. And, you know, we've been fishing pretty shallow for panfish or round shallows, you know, bayous. And I shut my sonar off. There's no reason to have it. I'm bobber fishing. So, you know, when you don't need it, as long as you know where everything is, you have like a little mental map, just shut it off. And it'll help a lot. Yep.
It'll make a difference, and you can almost measure it. I call it a spook radius around your boat, where, you know, with the sonar off, you might be able to catch them just pitching it out 10 or 12 feet from the boat or right beside the boat for that matter. Right. But when you've got it on, you might have to just get out there 26, 30 feet away or something like that. Right.
Yep.
We really notice it with kids that may or may not be able to cast quite as far. So we like to try and be as quiet. And it's funny too, we're in this day of electronics, and I'm fortunate enough to have the live scope, which is great. I don't really use it to catch fish, as much fun as it is watching them like that. But I do. I mean, they just can't hide from it. It's a big time cheater. It's pretty fun. But it just kind of reminds me of one of the best days I've had this spring. I was out with my wife Margaret, actually. Favorite little lake. It's only about an hour away. It's got this nice, beautiful little pond in the back. Just a tiny little cut to get into it, and we're back there. And it wasn't great. It was actually after one of these cold fronts moved through after a warming trend. So the fish were a little bit off. They were kind of like just suspended right on the edge leading into the shallows. There was no shallow fish going on at all. But we waited them out. And what I took away from that, there was 5 other boats that came in and out that went around the pond, all on their trolling motor, working fairly slowly. But anybody who's fished with me knows how slow. I will put you to sleep. And I've also got a pair of power poles on the back. But where I was kind of leading with this is all these new trolling motors with the spot lock. Everybody's raging and raving. It's going to be fantastic. I can get upwind. Even on a windy day, I can throw my float a mile into the crappies or whatever. But I promise you, when you put it on spot lock or anchor mode or whatever trolling motor you've got, it's constantly adjusting, and it's constantly putting those juju bad vibes or whatever you want to call them into the water column. And I promise you, all those guys kind of knew what they were doing. They were going slow enough that they should have been able to catch a fish, but it was one of those off days. And Margaret and I, we blasted them pretty good. I think I caught my biggest crappie of the spring that day on kind of an off day, but we never went anywhere. I fished 30 yards for Margaret's downstairs. I should ask her. I think we were there for about 8.5 hours, 30 yards, never moved. And we did well. We saw one of the other 5 boats catch a small bass that day. They didn't catch a bluegill, a pumpkin seed, a rock bass, a perch, nothing. But we were silent. We never moved. Power poles down, never moved one time. It makes a huge, huge difference. Yeah. All the graphs were off, like you said, Josh. Had to be the difference. We're good, but we're not that good. You know what I mean?
Well, I love hearing your story about that, because that's something that I just kind of got into this last year. I'm not necessarily fancy enough to have power poles on my boat, but I found another great option with digging anchors. Something that they use way down south, so down in Florida. Yeah, because what's great is I can use it as a push pole, or there's what do you call that? Like a tube slat that we attach to our boat.
There's 2 mounting brackets. Yeah. There's one on our bow, and there's one in the stern, and the stern is attached to where the boat motor is attached to the transom.
Sure.
It uses the same bolt, so you just mount the bracket there. You screw on the bracket on the bow of the boat, and then you can just pin it wherever you want.
But what we're saying, though, is I think especially on the river we started doing it, because what happens is we can pull up, getting close to shore, and then use the current to kind of drift towards brush, put down an anchor, drift in a little bit, put down an anchor, drift in. We can get all the way right up to brush without ever bumping it, just way more precise than an anchor. And I think like what you're saying, being quiet, being not very detectable, that has a big impact on the fish that we caught.
This is just flat out truth. So crappie, we had a crappie explosion in the Kawarthas. I used to live in Lindsay, which is maybe an hour and a half from here. And I was just right on the cusp. And I literally had these populations of crappie all to myself for like 7 or 8 years. Guys would get on them maybe when it's just perfect and all the fish are shallow, just like a week before the spawn. But there's probably 6 weeks of really good early springtime crappie fishing in these lakes. And I was the only one out there. And when I would guide for these things, this is before power poles. There was no power pole. I would take a painter's stick and just screw it together, 12 foot, and just jam it into the muck. No holder on the boat or anything, a piece of rope, and I would tie to it.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome.
And then I found that I would swing in the wind, So I would bring two of them, one off the front, one off the back, 2 ropes. Eventually, whatever breeze or wind is going to pull you tight, and you're going to sit there and be super, super quiet. And it was outstanding. I will probably never experience crappie fishing like that again in my life. That I can envision. Like 600 fish days, averaging 12 inches. I don't know if you've got anything like that. I'll probably never see it again.
No, if you know somebody who's got something like that, you call me and I'll come visit. We'll be best friends.
Outstanding. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And of course, I get these people who have heard the stories from other people that, you know, I was fortunate enough to take out there before anybody really got on it. But just like everything else, you know, things don't last forever. And once the word gets out, the people showed up. And I'll tell you, it can be like a parking spot on those lakes. But I literally, for a good 7 seasons in a row, it was me and maybe a kid fishing off his dock.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just absolutely a dream. Absolutely a dream. What's a big crappie where you guys are at? You guys must have.
I mean, it's a little bit loaded, I guess. So we'll get fish that are in the 16 or 17 inch range, but
where are you fishing?
So the fish will get up. The fish will get up that way, but you don't run into a whole bunch of. You don't run into them very often, and that's just because of the amount of fishing pressure on those species. Yeah. You know, so our average probably runs, you know, that 8 to 11.
Sure.
You know, we'll pull a decent number of you know 12 pluses, but nothing. You know, if we go out and we catch a 14, that's like a pretty big.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a pretty big.
You know what? It's like that. Realistically, I think it's like that in a lot of places. Pretty much from where you guys are, all the way across parts of Ontario, pretty much right onto the Quebec border. Is pretty much that sums it up. Like we talk, that's all you talk about is the biggest ones you catch, right? But when I say we've caught 17s, 18s, the biggest one I've ever known of was 19 and a quarter. You might see, I don't know, a dozen, maybe a dozen and a half of those a season.
Yeah.
If you fish a lot.
Right.
But, yeah, where we're at, you know, I consider a 12-inch anywhere I go. That's a heck of a nice fish. It's a beauty, you know.
Yeah. It is
13, oh, there we go. 14, now that's a nice one. And then a 15, that's getting to be a big crappie for sure. Right. And I actually have a friend of mine, Bruce Tufts, and I was telling him, you know, about these ridiculous crappies that we catch in the winter. And he actually he's a biologist, works at Queen's University, does a lot of fisheries research. And he wanted me to kill one. And I'm like, dude, I don't even eat them. I love them. I can't. No way. Not even to age them, right? And that's what he wanted to do, was age them. But since then, he kind of poked around, and I've done some poking around too. And where in our region, the biologists are suggesting that it takes about 4 or 5 years for a crappie to get between 10 and 12 inches, the harvestable size range. But after that, once they start spawning, they're like a lot of other species. Their growth rate, so much energy goes into the spawn. They lose that springtime opportunity, that feeding binge, and their growth just slows to a snail's pace. Maybe as much as a 1/4 of an inch per year. So you start doing some math. And I'm a full-fledged believer. I don't know. I don't have the science. I don't have any proof. But I think a lot of these giant crappies that we're catching, they're very, very well late teenagers. I think a lot of the crappie research and information that we've had in the past is from the southern states, which have a lot of white crappies, full year-round growing season. I don't think necessarily that those rules apply. And we know in the bass world that our bass probably live 2.5 times longer than they do in the States, that sort of thing. And when I say states, I don't mean you guys. I think where you guys live is probably more north than where I live.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're not so far away from Green Bay. We're almost just west of it. So we might be pushing just a little bit north of you.
Like half of the life cycle of a fish in most of Ontario is spent beneath the ice. and they're semi-dormant. I mean, not dormant. I mean, everybody eats, including largemouth in the wintertime, but I mean, their metabolism is just so slow, you know, and their growth rate is next to nothing. But that's kind of the message, and I'm sure you guys have done this 1,000 times on your show, but it can't be said enough, is to let those big, giant panfish go.
Yeah.
They're old, and they take so long to replace. You know, they've already made it to that. They've made it past that harvestable 10 to 12 inch size. These are special creatures, and they deserve the respect.
Well, and I think, excuse me, I think that a lot of the state's fisheries are starting to recognize panfish as a sport fish and not just for sustenance. And it's a very unique situation where there is such a strong sport fishing community for a sustenance fish. And so it's a weird balance that the states have to do, but I think they've been implementing, at least Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan. They've been slowly implementing these regulations that are limiting take per day, limiting possession, putting slots on some lakes. And it truly is helping. Like we have several lakes by us that are considered like high productive panfish lakes. And they put they call them test regulations. They just just decide to implement it.
100%.
And they've really helped. We've seen a difference in the last 4 years. You know, you can see the size go up, and it's just awesome.
I love me some bluegills too. Don't get me wrong about just talking about crappies, but I was kind of fortunate enough when I lived in Lindsay, I got involved with the Zone 17 Fish Advisory Council there. And believe it or not, it's not that long ago. It was like 11, 12 years ago. We had 0 regulations on our panfish. That's perch, crappie, bluegill, pumpkin seed, rock bass. Come, catch, take as many as you can carry home with you. And I don't have to tell you guys, people did. People did. I've got an MNR, which is like your DNR, border crossing check paper from a 5-hour window at the Sarnia border crossing in Western Ontario. So this would be people coming from Michigan primarily to come and fish, primarily in Zone 17, Rice Lake, no secret. Huge bluegill population there, extremely popular with a lot of folks from the U.S. who like to come with a great big cubic freezer or 2 in the back of the truck. Fair enough. It's not against the regulations. How could it be a bad idea? And they would harvest enough fish, take some back and sell them, keep some for themselves. It would pay for their holiday and it'd be a great time, right? Until all of the 12-inch bluegills disappeared from Rice Lake. Yeah. And the MNR said, maybe it is time, Peter. This is the saddest part of the whole story. It took me 2.5 years to convince them that this was a good idea. But I'm glad I did. And we now have some borderline realistic regulations in place finally. Going from none to something is better than just having it wide open.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think so often that there's a population of people out there that, you know, kind of feel like they should be able to do what they want. But I think, you know, no matter how we grew up, no matter what people in the past did or didn't do, one of the things is we want fish to be there for us for next time. You know what I mean? Like, quite frankly, the more that we take out, they have to be there to, you know, protect their nest, protect their spawning ground, you know, to move on to the next year. You know, as if winter wasn't hard enough on them in the first place, you know, then they have all these other battles to go around. So, you know, I mean, just keep a few there for even just yourself for next time. So,
yeah, you're right, Emily. And you know what? I'm no soapbox preacher by any means. And the reason why I'm so passionate about doing that sort of thing and working on getting those regulations established was 100% selfish. I just wanted the fishing to remain as good as it is and not see it wiped out before my eyes. Not in my lifetime, you know.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make
everybody happy anyway, so at least you can be, right?
That's right. And this is before we even had.
You gotta get the one question in.
It is true. It is true. What do I say every time at this point? I'm like, I look down, I'm like, oh my gosh. So Pete, you know, we had talked about how much you love your ice gear. So if that's your one thing, that's fine. But do you have a favorite piece of striker gear?
I'll tell you, from now till about September, it's probably the high tide hoodie.
Oh.
I live in that thing. I love it. And you know what? I'm a little bit skeptical, I think, by nature, but I'm an honest skeptic. And I couldn't believe the performance of it. I got my first taste of it last year. And I don't know what you guys are like. I'm sure some of your listeners, I'm not a big proponent. I don't like putting on sunscreen. It's gooey, it's icky. I have to touch my face. I'm not a big fan. I do it though. Believe me, I do it. And I still do it even with the striker gear. But having the long sleeves and now the pants, but the SPF, the protection that it gave me last year, I was blown away. Like our practice days for a tournament could be, 14, 16, whatever, from sun up till sundown. And you're just baking away. You're getting it twice as bad off the water. Everybody knows. And I just would not reapply. I was pretty diligent. I always have been. I'm 53, I think now. Got a lot of friends that are my age and older, right? And a lot of them are getting things carved off them routinely, and it's sun damage, and I just never wanted that. So I've always been pretty religious on putting my sunscreen on in the morning, but I would not reapply. I'll just tell you the flat honest truth. But I just feel so relieved knowing that I have this stuff on. And as good as the striker face masks are, I'm that guy. I don't like anything on my face. I don't like my own hands on my face to put sunscreen on. But the little bit of a buff on the high tide, and when I put the hoods up on them, I never had a sunburn at all last year, like ever. And I don't think that's ever happened since I was probably 5 years old.
Well, and one of the greatest things about the high tide, because, well, I'm actually wearing one tonight because I love them also. They're super comfortable. But I found that I have a really bad habit, with some of the sun gear to push my sleeves up. And I found that I had kind of a line I'm showing you in a screen that you can't see, where about where I pushed my sleeve up to, where some of my arm was burnt and some was not. So, with the high tide hoodies, you do have thumb holes. But again, it's a very comfortable thing to wear like that. So if I was holding my rod, if I was fishing, if I was casting, it's not the kind of fit that's going to be slippery. I could still detect a bite. But again, it would remind me to not push my sleeves up and not get burnt. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm so happy with their sun gear. And I may have lied to you, the high tide is probably my favorite shirt, but the gloves, the fingerless fishing gloves, I wasn't 100% sure. Again, I'm skeptical. I used them I didn't actually think that I'd be comfortable hanging onto the rod and reel. I fish in the summertime, after this weekend, I'm bass from now probably till November. I mean, spade. I live 3 minutes away from arguably one of the best largemouth fisheries in the province. I use it a lot. And those gloves, the very first time I put them on, just saved my hands. Absolutely saved my hands. Love it.
Well, and for those of you who out there, joining us for tonight's talk, those gloves are a great Father's Day gift.
Yeah.
So, if you are still thinking about that last minute, there's a lot of really great stuff on that Striker website, but those casting gloves, I got to say, that about fits the bill for Father's Day. So perfect timing on that. That's awesome.
Emily, I'm looking at the comments here, and my partner here, Rob LaFleur, he was the fellow I was telling you about who never got to set the hook that day on. So had to bring that up, eh? You've probably been trying to forget about that day ever since.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. So, we love hearing about your adventures, you and Rob and a whole bunch of other people. So, how do people continue to follow you after tonight's episode?
You know what? I do most of my communication through Facebook. Maybe it's because I'm 53, I'm told. You can find me on Instagram. I don't hide behind any funky names or taglines or anything. Pete Garnier, I'm easy to find. And if you ever have any questions on anything, I'm pretty much an open book. People don't tell me a lot, but I have a lot to say, so I don't blame them. But I have no secrets. If you got an honest question or maybe an area in your fishing that you think I might be able to help you out with, I'm open to do that an awful lot.
Perfect.
That is awesome. And if you're watching this episode and you decide to still leave a comment or question here, that's something that we can pass along to Pete. Maybe he'll even see, depending. But for the viewers at home, just keep in mind that next week, Josh and I are on vacation. So, thank you to all the people who watch us so loyally every single Tuesday. So June 22nd, we will be off and hopefully actually in the boat fishing. We'll be back with you Tuesday, June 29th, and it's going to be a great show, so we cannot wait for that. To those of you at home, thank you for joining us. Pete, thank you for joining us also.
Yeah, absolutely. Have the greatest time next week, guys. Catch a bunch for me too, right?
Thank you
so much.
Absolutely.
And looking forward to next week's edition of Hook, Line, and Striker.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, all.